Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We're back again. Still hyped up on coffee, as always.
We recently recorded a podcast on the childcare transitions, or school transitions, but thought it would also be nice to talk through the different childcare options that people have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people almost sometimes feel like they know what their potential options are, but then they get overwhelmed just navigating how you choose for your family.
Right. Maybe some of the pros and cons for each.
Right.
It's like one of those decisions where you feel like you just want to make like the best choice for your family, but really like
Best choice.
any choice is good. The best choice is the one that works for your family.
And if you make a choice that doesn't work out, you can just change it.
Correct.
You always forget that too.
Yes. So why don't we just start with like breaking down the options, at least the way that Emily and I see it, which is daycare, which could be like we break it down to like a home daycare or corporate daycare. Those are the two ways that we sort of describe it, but really just like any daycare option. Nannies, where you could do like a private nanny or a nanny share, the difference between that. An au pair. Or having family actually help you with childcare.
Totally.
Yeah. I think it would be nice to just like break down the different options and maybe the pros and cons of each.
Yeah.
What?
Start with daycare?
Sure.
I mean, neither of us have actually used daycares, but we've used private preschools, which feels sometimes slightly similar in some aspects, but
yeah,
tons of our clients use daycares all the time.
I mean, tons of our clients do. I mean, my sister does an in-home daycare. My neighbor upstairs actually does an in-home daycare. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest pro, obviously, with a daycare is this like built-in socialization piece. I think that's what people are thinking about a lot. Your child is around other children their age. There are obviously huge impacts around kids being around other kids in terms of their social development. So I think that's one of the biggest draws towards daycare.
There's also like a little curriculum, like there's some education in there.
There's some kind of schedule.
It's a schedule and it focuses on development, growth, milestones, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Daycare is reliable.
Yeah.
It's always there.
Yep.
It's always open. I'm not going to call out sick on you usually.
Well, except in the last 2 years with COVID.
Except in a pandemic, but typically speaking.
No, I know. Traditionally,
call out sick.
Right. Traditionally, you have somebody to take care of your kid on the days and times that you've signed up for.
They're open.
Yeah. In terms of cost, so we'll talk about cost in all of these situations. In terms of cost, I mean, it really does depend on the daycare, right? Like,
and where you live.
Right. And where you live. Definitely it's going to be location and the daycare. In-home daycares typically are going to be less expensive than the corporate daycares.
Your sister had a suite set up at a home daycare.
She still does.
Yeah. So good.
She doesn't have to bring anything.
It's incredible.
They make the food for all the kids too, starting with purees for babies. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, that could be a pro for a daycare too, if you can find a daycare like that. But yeah, cost, it's just going to depend on where you live, what kind of daycare it is. Usually the cost starts to get, obviously, like the more kids you have, like if you have more kids in daycare, it's, going to be double the price if you have 2 kids in daycare. Sometimes you get like some discount on that, right? But like that's when I feel like most people use the daycare for their first, maybe second kid, or first kid, and then maybe their first kid's going to preschool or something, and their second kid can go to the daycare. And so the cost sort of offsets itself there. But if you have 2 kids in the daycare, it can start to get expensive. And I think that's when a lot of families start thinking about the transition to maybe like a nanny or something like that.
Or for some, it's worth the cost if they work really long hours.
Right.
Like there are some parents out there that they've got to get that early drop off at 7, and they might be working till 6 or 6:30.
Right.
And there are some daycares that will meet those needs.
That are open from 6 to 6.
Might be a little bit more expensive, but got to get to the job.
Right. I feel like when people think about cons, especially related to daycare, if you talk to anybody who sent their kid to daycare,
any Facebook group in the country about the cons of daycare,
like the number one issue is like illnesses, right? Like you cannot send your kid to daycare when they're sick, and your kid is going to be exposed to a lot of germs and contract a lot of illnesses.
The posts are always like, I really want to go to daycare, but I'm afraid of my kid getting sick. Or we just started daycare and my kid is
been sick. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, like that is one of the cons. What I will say is that this con eventually turns into a pro in the sense that kids who go to daycare typically are less sick once you send them to school.
Absolutely.
And there is actually research to support this. Yeah.
Like later.
So again, depending on how you want to look at that, but I would definitely say like that is the number one downside or con that people are weighing as it relates to daycare, in addition to like maybe it's not a long-term solution for childcare if you're planning on having more than one
everyone
kid.
pays their dues at some point though, right? Like you're either going to go to daycare and your baby or your toddler is going to get sick early on and then finally they're not. But if even I had a nanny, my kids started school eventually, like they went to preschool and it's like the same thing. It's going eventually.
Knock on wood, my kids are never sick. It's really an anomaly.
It's crazy. Like Grace is sick all the time.
I know.
And Maddie has a steel.
Yeah, she's never sick. Yeah.
Ever.
No, I know. Kate's never sick, but yeah.
I'm not even gonna knock on wood.
Yeah.
Kids made of steel.
Yeah.
Totally.
Moving on. Want to talk about nannies?
Yeah, let's talk about nannies. This is kind of fun because I mean it's relatable for us. We both have used the nanny route.
Yeah.
Private nanny for you. I've done a few nanny shares, which is cool too.
It's Kate.
Oh my gosh, I forgot. Totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Private nanny is great because you can find someone that's just dedicated to your family. If you are somebody that has a job that changes pace, or sometimes you have to run late at work, this could be good. If you have to work extra hours, or you need longer days,
flexibility.
Your child is getting that one-on-one attention and care just for them. And a lot of nannies, if you build it in with them right from the start and set the expectations of what you need from them, they'll do some laundry, maybe some dishes. Some will do cooking.
Yeah. I mean, I've had multiple people share with me following the podcast that I did with Caro Chambers. I've done two. I'm talking about the first one that I did with her. If you're curious to listen to that one, check it out. It's called
also like the highest listened podcast I've done. People love that one.
The Jamie and Caro shit show. But I've had multiple people tell me that like the takeaway from that was like setting the expectations with your private nanny, like from the get-go around like things that they can help you with around the house. And just like, you know, obviously agreeing on them mutually. But it does really help like take things off of your plate. So I always use the example now I've known my nanny for years, like even before she started. I am in a rare scenario where even before she started watching my kids, I had known her for several years because she was watching my friends' kids. She had an opening 2 days a week for my oldest daughter after I had her to take her 2 days a week in a nanny share. And then it is translated into her now being our full-time nanny.
And that when you don't need her anymore, you're still going to find a way.
I mean, it's going to be a really hard time for me. Yeah. I want our nanny to be part of our life forever.
Stay to watch the puppy.
So she, so I had known her for a while. We more so had like an unspoken agreement about things that she would do, just because I know the things that she already did for other people. So like my house is always clean when I come home. She does the girls' laundry. She loads and unloads the dishwasher. She even like organizes areas of my house when the older girls were at school and she was home with Camilla and Camilla would nap, she would organize the pantry, a closet. Like it's just awesome, the stuff that she does. But like, these are the things that you can build into any agreement with a nanny is like, okay, like laundry is not a problem in my house.
Right.
It's the example that I always use because my husband does his own laundry. I do my own laundry and our nanny does the kids' laundry. And it's just like not anything that anybody ever thinks about.
Right.
And it's great. Right. So think about the things that would be helpful. Like you mentioned laundry, dishes, maybe even some, like Caro talked about how her nanny actually like can like, you know, like cleans up after she's like made a video or something like that.
Or out the things that feel obvious, because I will say I've had a couple different like nannies in my lifetime. Just from like doing different nanny shares and having them at my house or other people's house. And I actually didn't know to call those things out. Like just picking up like the basic toys at the end of the day.
No, I know.
Washing the bottles that are in the sink, like little stuff.
That's because you thought it was obvious.
And also it didn't actually really bother me at first. Like I came home and there'd be toys everywhere. We hosted a nanny share, maybe bottles in the sink. And I just like, at first I didn't really care.
Yeah.
And then like I was really working a lot. And then I thought to myself, these are kind of obvious, but I had to be clear and direct and just say, it would be really helpful if you could do these things.
Yeah.
flash forward like years later, now that I have a nanny for Eloise, like right away we sat down together and had a conversation. And I was like, it would be really helpful for you to do the girls' laundry.
Yeah.
Which was like, I've never asked anyone to do that before. And I was like, that's a pain point for me. Not my laundry or AJ's, just the kids. Like there's 3 of them and there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
And she just does. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Like once a week she does it, she folds it, she puts it away.
Yeah.
Like seeing a task all the way through.
I know.
Isn't that lovely?
It's lovely.
Lovely. So you got to talk about it though.
Yeah, I would definitely outline that from the get-go. It's not weird at all.
But it's not weird.
Just a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Cons, I would say, and these could go a few different ways, right? But like cons, I think most people think of cost. Again, maybe it makes more sense the more kids that you have, right? Because if you had to put 2 or 3 kids in daycare, then like having a private nanny actually probably makes way more sense, right? Or related to cost, we're going to talk about nanny shares next. And like, that's actually a way to balance out the cost a little bit. And socialization. So I think this really depends on where you live and like who your nanny is. Because like my kids socializing with other kids has never been a concern of mine, but I also live in a city.
Eloise has friends.
No, I know.
She's got a friend named Mark. It's like a baby the same age as her. And my nanny's friends with the nanny. And there's now another little girl showing up in the pictures too. And she just has like friends. She's 9 months old.
Yeah.
Kids out all day.
I know.
Park, water park, socializing.
I know.
I mean,
so it depends on where you live, depends on the nanny. Like if you are, so like Emily and I live in the city, right? Like our nannies are friends with other nannies. So they're meeting up with other kids all the time. I mean, this is translated into my oldest, who's now 7, is in school with kids who she hung out with, like in her nanny and nanny share, right? So socialization doesn't have to be an issue, but if you are living somewhere where like you're not in a city and you can't just walk to a park, right? Or your nanny doesn't know other nannies or something like that, then think about activities that maybe you can sign your nanny up for 100%. With the kids. So is there a music class? Is there, like the
library does like free little like story times or toddler times. Even if your child is a baby, like I just said, Eloise, like go to the tab and give them permission, because some nannies aren't sure if you are okay with them taking your baby to the library or to the park. Like you should just lay that stuff out there. I think it'd be great if you got my baby out.
Alternatively, from the socialization piece, another option that addresses like what we're listing as like cons in the private nanny piece is like the cost and the socialization. You could do a nanny share. And this is really popular among families who have their first kid, sometimes the second kid, but with their first kid. And basically what a nanny share is that 2 families share a nanny, not like 3 days a week and 2 days a week, like 5 days a week. A nanny watches 2 babies around the same-ish age. They don't have to be the same age, I guess, but around the same age. And the families basically like split the cost of the nanny. Now, I would say traditionally you're paying a little bit more than like what their hourly rate would be for them to like be your private nanny. That's because
the benefit for them.
Yeah.
Like, give them a little bit more.
Yeah.
Splitting it with another.
But you're also like, let's say you pay a private nanny $20 an hour. Maybe you're paying a nanny and a nanny share, $26 an hour, and each family's paying $13, right? So like you can see where there's like that cost savings there. And you have this like built-in socialization piece without the like overwhelming concern of your kid getting sick all the time.
I'm just going to tell you now too, these kids have this most special relationship. Grace and my nephew Wyatt did a nanny share from when they were babies until they went to school. They are just so close in a certain way. It's almost like probably if you had twins.
No,
it's a little thing. It's adorable.
And you typically, like, in terms of where the nanny share happens, it can be just at one person's house, and that's the house that they're always at. So when Kate was in a nanny share, I always dropped her off at the little boy's house, which I was fine with.
Give a shit about my house. Apparently, there's toys everywhere. I'm like, yeah, bring kids over.
I also just didn't like. It was. I initially was like, oh, I kind of wish they were here, and then I was like, no, I don't, because my house is clean at the end of every day. It really just didn't matter to me though, because they were out like all day long anyway. It didn't matter where they went.
I mean, my house at one point did look like a giant daycare center, like swings, pack and plays, bouncers, so much stuff.
Anyway. I'm going to say there's a plus and a minus here with like a pro and a con when it comes to nannies or nanny shares and sick days. One is obviously like if your nanny's sick, whether you're in a nanny or in a nanny share, like, you don't have childcare. Like that's just different than daycare where they'll guarantee your care. Like you don't have guaranteed care with a nanny if they're sick. And
on the flip side though,
if your kid is sick,
if your kid is sick, your nanny can still come.
Yeah.
But if your kid is sick at daycare, you can't drop them off.
Correct.
I mean,
that's the pro,
yeah.
right? If your kid is sick, especially with like all these viruses, right? That like aren't contagious, but are leaving your kid, sick and at home.
They're coughing, but they're fine. But
right. Or have a fever, but it's like a virus, right?
Right.
Or an ear infection they have a fever for, like you can't bring them to daycare, then you can have a nanny still come. So I think those are the pros of the nanny piece of it. I feel like we should stop here for one sec before we dive into au pairs and family.
Yeah.
And just talk about like, I think everybody's like, yeah, cool. Understand all of like my options here, but like, how the fuck do I find any of these providers? Right.
Right.
Whether it's a nanny or daycare, I would actually just start with like getting recommendations from people locally, like join a Facebook group or a parent group or a mom's group, like in your community, start connecting with other families. If you're new to the community, if you're not, just like talk to other families, friends, whatever. And find out like what daycares do other people go to. Actually start talking to families who go to the daycares.
Right.
Ask them what they like about it, what they don't like about it, what they wish was different. Like if there's one thing they could change, what would it be? Like, how are the caretaker, right? Like actually interview the families that go there, then choose, then go and look at the daycares.
That's
and actually
a very reasonable thing to ask the daycare for, because often when you're looking at daycares, you are interviewing them and asking them the questions. And I would also say, can you give me a couple names?
100%. Yeah. So interview the daycares, interview people who go to the daycares. Usually when you talk to somebody, I would talk to them on the phone. I would try not to do the like interview with families through an email, only because like, if you're like Emily and I, you can get somebody on the phone as soon as you hear them talking about something. It's like, I can tell whether or not you really like this.
Totally.
Or if you're just being nice, right? So I would definitely like get people on the phone and talk to them, or even meet up with somebody for a coffee or something if you wanted to. And then with nannies, I would, same thing, start with like local families. Is there anybody like moving? There's a lot of shifting that goes along, I feel like, especially in the summertime, of like people moving out, new people moving in.
Get on the mom boards, right?
Yes.
The best case scenario is you're in your local Facebook group or your local mom like community.
Yeah.
And there's a bulletin board. The best scenario is someone's like, oh, we're moving and we can't take our nanny. And she's so awesome. And because for me, when I didn't need my nannies anymore because, the kids were going to school, I felt personally responsible to find them a loving family. I was interviewing the families for them to make sure that they were
right. And same thing, like if you get a referral, I mean, if you're getting a direct referral from a family, that's always great, right? Because you have like a referral built in that you can just like talk to, but then get references from the nanny to talk to other families. And again, talk to them on the phone. One of the tips that I really like is like, if you're home on a maternity leave and it's like nice out and there's playgrounds nearby and you go to the playground and you see other nannies there with kids, like actually start like, and you like a few nannies and how they interact with the kids, like start talking to those nannies, not to poach them from the families, because I would cut you if you tried to poach my nanny from me, but
she would never do you dirty like that.
No, never. But there is, but what you can do is start having conversations with nannies who you like, and be like, if you ever hear of anybody, like if any of the nannies who or if you know of anybody who's like looking for a family, like please, like
they're loyal to their nanny friends.
I totally agree. 100%. Like even my nanny would be like, oh, so-and-so is looking for a job. And I'm like, ooh, I'll find a good family for that person. Instead of like, oh, let me just post like haphazardly about it. Like I will specifically find a family.
There's also platforms and agencies.
Yeah, you can always go the agency route,
right? But you can go onto like something like care.com or platforms where you can filter through applicants, versus there are agencies that exist in the country that you can find and you pay them. And they will find the nanny for you. So there's different levels from you hitting the ground looking to getting a little bit of like an online platform help to paying someone to handle it for you.
Yes.
So
I feel like this is
overwhelming.
No, it can be very overwhelming. Start early in the process and start with people I think is always a good
I will say it's hard. This comes up all the time. When you're looking at daycare, you've got to look when you're pregnant, versus I just did a group. I hosted a group of expecting moms, and we were talking about this. When you want a nanny, it's hard sometimes to find one when you're pregnant because the turnaround is so quick. So it is often that you end up landing them when you are on maternity leave,
Yeah.
which can be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the daycare, you got to get on the list. You got to wait
Yeah.
sometimes a long time, like a
Right,
year.
right.
Versus nannies, they're looking for work right away when they
Within
need
like
work.
1 to
So
3
it's,
months.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
agree
just
with you
keep
there.
that in mind.
Anyway, a good transition into like agencies is the option of having an au pair. I mean, your
I
sister did
always
an au
talk
pair,
about
so I
this
feel like,
because
yeah.
my sister did this. I love this because, well, my sister spent some time in France. She speaks French, and she did tell me that au pair is on par. It means equal. So they become an equal part of your family, which
Yeah.
I just think is a really nice way of thinking about it because you're bringing someone into your home to live with you, and it's not like you're hiring them out. They're becoming a part of your family.
Yeah.
My sister did this. You're providing home and accommodations, and they had a lovely woman from Germany come. Her name was Celine. We still keep in touch with her. She became a part of our whole family.
Yeah.
She lived with my sister, and she took care of my nieces. This was great for my sister because in terms of budget, it made sense for their family. They could afford to have her live with them and feed her, and they would bring her on trips with them.
Yeah.
But financially speaking, they get paid like a flat rate each
You
week.
pay like a flat fee each
Right.
week that is a pretty low fee. Like truly usually only a few $100s,
Right.
but it's because you're providing them essentially with room and board, right? So like you're
Exactly.
responsible for all meals, housing, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the agency, the au pair agency is the one that will match you with the person. And I mean, obviously your interviewing people will match you with the au pair. Excuse me. And there's also regulations around their hours and time. So like you have them for a set, you have them for a set number of hours, and they actually are like clock in and clock out.
Yeah.
And like when they clock out, they're like, you have to have their own space that they stay in that's like away from, separate from the family.
Which is great because Celine came from Germany.
Totally.
She wanted to see Boston. She wanted to do a trip to New York on the weekend.
Yeah.
And sometimes she went off and did those things on her own. And sometimes my sister would say to her, look, we're flying to Florida.
Yeah.
Do you want to, we'll bring you.
I mean, it really
us,
is like a foreign exchange program in the sense of like
I
the
know.
piece of this is that it is mostly European women who are providing the care, and it's a cultural
I
experience.
think it's very cool.
Yeah. 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 And but that also means that these contracts are usually only a year, sometimes 2 years, or a year and a half.
You've got to have the space too.
But yeah,
like
and
for
you have to have
me,
the
I
space.
would love to do this because when I lived in Belgium in high school, when we traveled for sports, host families would keep us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I would go to
I
other
know.
countries, I would stay with the families. It
Yeah.
was so awesome.
Yeah.
So I would love to do that for someone here in Boston. I don't have the space.
Yeah.
Like unless they want to sleep on a trundle mattress in a bedroom with 3 kids.
Yeah. So I feel like the pros here
You gotta give
are
them a bedroom, guys.
No, you do.
You got to give them a bedroom.
Yeah. I feel like the pros here are obviously cost.
Yep.
And this integration into your family piece. I actually think that's like such a huge pro. And cons being like, do you actually have the space?
Right.
And maybe limitations around hours, because depending on what your work is, and if you have long days or things like that, like not having to overwork them. Yeah.
Right.
But the au pairs are run by agencies. Like this is, you would go through an agency,
interview some people.
Yes. And then pick somebody and they set up your contract.
So cool.
Yeah.
And let's not leave out family.
Last but not least. Yeah.
In-laws, family members.
Yeah.
Sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, whoever wants to take your kids.
Yeah.
That's family.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say when we're talking about the option of family, obvious pros, usually free.
Yeah. Usually.
Doesn't have to be.
$3.99.
It doesn't have to be. And in fact, I wouldn't like, especially if it's like a sibling or an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, like I guess it would be hard to like pay your parents, but you can. But like I wouldn't rule out paying somebody like some kind of
my mom if she would just retire,
some kind of weekly, some kind of weekly stipend, because then it feels like not as hard to like ask for the things that you really need, right? But so one of the pros is its biggest pro is it's a family member who like knows your kid, knows your family. Like there's little like adjustment to getting to know the person, and it could be free, right? Those are the pros. Like those are huge pros, right? But the cons are what I was just alluding to is like, maybe it sometimes is hard to be like, so you can't actually do it that way. Like, I don't want you to do it that way.
Especially when it's not your direct family member and it might be your partner's family.
Right.
It can be very uncomfortable.
I
We
mean,
do this all the time with women that we
not
work
true.
with.
I think it's hard no matter how you slice it, whether
Yeah,
it's
that's
your own,
true.
whether it's your
thinking
own
of,
mother
like,
or your mother-in-law.
moms in my MSG group,
No, I know.
they usually are like, oh, I want to say something, but it's like not my mom or
Yeah.
it's not my dad. And
Yeah.
well, you gotta.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely something to consider. Like, is the person who is willing to watch your kid like somebody who's actually reliable, somebody who's actually going to do the things the way that you want it done, somebody who's going to show up on time, somebody who's going to clean up after themselves. Like, what is important to you, and does that person actually have those qualities?
And if it's not going to be able to work out that way, then it might not be worth it that it's
right
for your family. Like, you actually might prefer to pay because you get the care that you actually just need.
Right.
It just depends.
One aspect of childcare is the financial cost. And do not get me wrong, it is a huge aspect of choosing the right childcare provider, right? So when you have the free option, I get leaning towards that. But like, there are other things that play into that relationship beyond finances. And I really think a lot of it is your physical and mental well-being. And if like the person watching your child is not good for your physical and mental well-being, then like maybe that's not the right person for you. And or your child's physical or mental well-being, right? Like if they cannot follow like basic instructions around like feeding and sleep
every day, that's gonna come back to bite you in the ass.
Right.
Like,
so I would really, I would really think about that in terms of the option for family. And maybe the solution ends up being you have a family member, you know, once or twice a week or something.
Totally,
and then you use and then you use the daycare or the nanny share or the nanny like the other days a week or something like that. That does end up being like a really good middle ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I would think about. Those are the things that I would think about when you're thinking about childcare options. And obviously, if you have more questions about this, Emily and I are always available for a call, or we talk about this in our mom survival groups. This is like one of the topics for the week.
Day on just being a stay-at-home mom versus going back to work, navigating childcare, navigating pumping, navigating the mental load around these transitions too.
There's
a lot that goes into it, actually.
And then choosing the provider. So that's all we got for you today. Hopefully not
quite enough.
Not as funny as our typical episodes, but we'll be back to humor you.
Boring. Please come back again.
But hopefully you got some quick tips out of this one. All right, that's all we got for you this week.
See you later.